Welcome to the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me as always is my producer, Kevin Black, my co-host, Stephen Gillespie. Stephen, we get our own show to ourselves tonight. We don't have a special guest on this week. Tyler Rucker is taking care of some things in his own life, so hopefully we'll be able to swing back around with him next week. But it's you and I tonight. We're talking NCAA Tournament Weekend 2. We're going to give some of our reactions. We're going to talk about some of the prospects and the games. And then I'm going to give you credit for this one. This is fantastic. You labeled doing a Final Four preview as the final forecast. And I'm like, hey. You know what? I could not come up with that. That's the creative juice I expect from you, Stephen. How you doing?
Man, I'm doing great, Nathan. I'm happy to be here. You know, shout out to Tyler for going out and doing adult things tonight, you know, just stuff that everyone has to go through every once in a while. But I mean, if it's got to be just two people, man, I don't know of any two better people to be recapping this weekend that we just had in NCAA basketball. I'm excited to talk about these guys. And yeah, I did have a stroke of creative genius with the final forecast, but that might be the heavy hitting that I bring tonight, but we'll see.
Well, I'm glad you are here. And I'm glad, as I've said in previous episodes, that you are the new co-host on this podcast. Because if you weren't here, it would just be me. And the audience would have to listen to me ramble on, do another solo podcast.
They would get to.
I think over the last going on 2 years here, I think they've heard enough of those solo episodes for a while. I think everyone out there is probably happy that I get to go back and forth with somebody like yourself. So we won't waste a lot of time. We'll briskly move through this episode, as I don't think there's too many amazing thoughts that we're going to give on this show. It's a lot of recap and it's a lot of rehashing prospects that we've been talking about for weeks and weeks and weeks throughout this draft cycle. So just different matchups, different games that they've gotten to play in, that's all. But we'll start with Houston and Villanova. So Stephen, you actually did a good job at outlining some of the prospects that you and I wanted to talk about tonight. So you wrote down some of the Houston guys, Jamal Shead and Fabian White specifically. Yep. And then on the Villanova side, I mean, Colin Gillespie's been making his bones really this entire year as like a legitimate NBA guy. Maybe not the most draftable prospect. Like, I don't know if I'm spending a second round pick on him, but if I'm creating like a top 80, top 100, like he's probably in it at this point. I don't have too many questions about his game in terms of him at least getting a cup of coffee in the league, and hopefully with everything else he brings to the table, he's probably going to end up sticking somewhere for at least a short amount of time. And then you highlighted Jermaine Samuels as one of the other guys. I know there's some Brandon Slater fans out there. Yep. I was a Justin Moore fan at one point, and first of all, best wishes to him as he's going to have to recover from a really tough injury that he suffered during the game over the weekend. I kind of cooled on him as being a prospect about after the first month of the season, because we saw him in more higher profile games against better athletes, better players, and he just cannot create the separation off the bounce that he would need to do in the NBA. And he's a good shooter, but he's not a great shooter. So that definitely limits his case, in my opinion, as like a draftable prospect as well. When he gets healthy and he decides to come out into the draft, can he win over the favor of an NBA team to at least get a shot? Absolutely. He's a Villanova guy, and we see time and time again. I know you have made that case multiple times. If they're from Villanova, they probably have a chance to play in the NBA. Yep. Where they're coming from. So I'll kick it to you first, Stephen. Out of some of the guys that we highlighted here, is there anybody in particular who really stood out to you and maybe showed you something a little different, or at the very least strengthened the case that you were already making for him?
Well, I think Jamal Shead was a guy that I wasn't really taking serious all year long. And I would argue that through the regular season and maybe even a little bit into the conference play, that he didn't really do a whole lot. But then you fast forward to, you know, the tournament here, and he's putting up just absolute mind-boggling numbers throughout the tournament. And he didn't get to do that against Villanova. You know, Coach Wright does a great job of scheming around another team's best players. And I think that it's worth noting here that Houston making it as far as they did without their two top guys, you know, Sasser predominantly probably being the top of those two. It's phenomenal. You know, I mean, Houston did a great job. Jamal Shead was a big reason behind why they made it as far as they did. But again, Coach Wright and that staff, the seniority that the Wildcats do have, it definitely showed. And although that Villanova really wasn't regarded as being a team that could bust some brackets, I mean, it's crazy that people, including myself, kind of discounted what Coach Wright brings to the table with guys like Jermaine Samuels Jr., with guys like Colin Gillespie, and then the supporting cast. Dixon had a couple of really big games
Yep.
throughout this tournament as well. And I started thinking like, okay, is this kind of like a combo 4-5 type player? You know, he showed that he can stretch the floor a little bit. He can rebound. So I don't know. When I'm looking at the Houston side, Fabian White Jr. was kind of a big disappointment over the past couple of games because he was really good
That's your
throughout the
guy,
regular.
though, man. That's
I
your
was
guy.
really big on him coming into the tournament, and he had a couple of big moments in the tournament, but he didn't really string together a good run of games. And I think that he can still get a cup of coffee in the NBA, but with other players that we're going to be talking about throughout this tournament, I think he really did himself a disservice as far as his draft stock is concerned. But Jamal Shed, I think that he kind of raised some eyebrows. It'll be interesting to see what kind of buzz that he started to generate for himself with this upcoming draft cycle.
So the last guy I would probably want to mention in this Houston group would be Kyler Edwards. And by the
Yep.
way, if you were looking for spectacular shooting performances, I mean, you weren't going to find him in this game. Houston was 1 for 20 from 3-point range. Villanova was not much better, 5 for 21. And even Colin Gillespie, somebody who I just got done giving compliments to, he only went 1 of 6 from the field in this game. He had the biggest shot,
Yep.
arguably, in the game. But other than that, his presence was really felt on the defensive side of the ball, which is really, I mean, going back to what he brings to the table, that's another area in the game where he's really made his bones throughout his entire career, playing really sound within that Villanova defensive system and making life a living hell for some of the guards on the opposing team. Kyler Edwards, like I said, did not shoot the ball well. Jamal Shed, all of the credit we can give him for being hotter than usual from 3-point
Yep.
range earlier in the tournament. He did not shoot the ball well. Fabian White Jr. struggled to make himself felt on the interior against some of the size that Villanova has, and Dixon Slater, and particularly Jermaine Samuels, who also had 10 rebounds in this game. I mean, this was a really good game for Jermaine Samuels to really showcase himself as a potential NBA guy at the next level. I think a lot of those dreams have died off in the sense of, I think, and Maxwell even brought this up in our group chat, that I think if Jermaine would have shown himself to be a better shooter over the course of this entire year, I think he'd be a lot higher on radars and might even be within more top 60s than you're probably seeing him now. Is he going to get a shot in the league, as we've talked about with a good number of these guys? Yeah, I think he definitely is. But I don't know if any one guy that we saw in this game today would be a draftable prospect for me. I'm assuming you might differ. I don't know if you've come off the Fabian White bandwagon a little bit, but would you consider any one of these guys, either side? Is there anybody who you would really consider draftable with one of the top, we have to say, 58 picks this year right now?
Probably not. I came down off of the Fabian White Jr. take, especially when I started getting more into the international side of things. And I'm not going to lie, even talking with Coach Spence and going back and looking at some of the guards that we discussed with him, with, Mike Miles and Caleb Love, more to come on him here in a little while. I started really considering how the efficiency kind of did play into my evaluation of those guys, and going back and watching more film and preparing for the show. And then even afterwards, listening to him break down their game, I was like, okay, maybe I was a little bit unfair to them. And hey, there's still time before the draft for my board to be finalized. But since then, Fabian White has kind of fallen down a little bit, and the margin of talent when you get to like 50 to 80 isn't very significant at
No,
all.
no.
I feel like I could be argued either way, depending on what side of the bed I wake up on any particular day. But I don't know. I don't know if Jamal Shed might have worked his way up within some people's top 100 just based off of tournament play. Nathan, you and I both know that a lot of people's first time watching college basketball comes around this this
Yep.
time of the year. So maybe he kind of bolstered himself up into some big boards. But overall, for me, I would say I was high on Jermaine Samuels Jr. coming into the season. I actually had him within my top 60s, 80s, 100s, like early on in the season. Since then, he's fallen outside of my top 100. But again, with that margin of talent, it's not unreasonable that he doesn't work his way back up in there. But I'm probably not spending one of the 58 draft picks on any of these guys. But I'm circling names for that undrafted free agency in summer league.
Yeah, I think Shed's probably going to be a guy who comes back next year. I'd be shocked if he was in the draft. Fabian White Jr. and Kyler Edwards will both be in the draft. Colin Gillespie will be eligible for the draft, as well as Jermaine Samuels. So there are some names out there. I just don't know if I would draft any of them in particular. Jamal Shed has some fans in the draft community. I know that I went back and forth pretty early on in the year. I've been a big Marcus Sasser guy versus Jamal Shed.
Yeah.
I think Chuck from Chucking Darts put forth an argument about Shed. Well, that he's a scrappy guard. He's only 6'1", but he's built well to himself. When he does get inside, he can do a few things around the basket. It's just when you look at some of these smaller guards, Steven, you have to be able to shoot the ball at least a great clip. I've never seen that from Jamal Shed. He's a sub 30% three-point shooter on the year. I know that he got hot from three at some points during this tournament, but I don't see that being a consistent part of his game. He's a ground-bound guard. He doesn't really get up off the floor when he gets around the basket. I don't fully trust the runner to be like the most consistent part of his game. He's a good passer. I'll give him credit. What he can handle in transition, even in the half court off that initial screen up top, he can make some good decisions with the basketball. And then we know what he brings on the defensive end. He's competitive. He's tough as nails. He gets in your grill. He averages over a steal per game. I get all of that. I just don't know how good of an NBA guard he could end up being. I think he's much more of like a really good college guard. And that's probably where we're going to leave it for him. As for Fabian White, I see the case for him too. Like when you wanted to put Fabian White as part of like the top 60, like I didn't think it was crazy. Like we're talking about, especially when we're like in that 40 to 60 range, like nothing really seems to be that crazy, particularly in this draft class. It's just not as deep in my opinion as other years. But I break down Fabian White's game individually, and do you remember a player from SMU by the name of Ben Moore?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So they compare very favorably physically. Like I think they're both 6'8", around that 220, 225 pound mark. I wouldn't say they're like excellent athletes. I think Ben's definitely like a level or two above Fabian, but in terms of like the role that they play on the floor and where they're best suited at within the offense, they're both really not as reliable stretch forwards as I would like them to be. I know you might trust Fabian White's jumper a little more than I do. I probably don't. I think both of them are best suited like to operate out of the dunker spot within an offense. And I just don't think Fabian finishes around the basket nearly as efficiently as somebody like Ben Moore. And the reason why I bring up that name is that I liked Ben Moore as a prospect probably more then than I do like Fabian White now. And even now, I would probably still take Ben Moore as somebody who I'd rather have on my team. And he's somebody, he hasn't been able to hold down a steady NBA job. So it's like, if that's the type of comparison I'm going to have with Fabian White, and I think it's going to be a struggle for him to stick in the league if he's not able to space the floor much better from the corners and bring that jump shot into part of his offensive arsenal, then like, why am I looking at him potentially spending a draft pick on him? And that's a line of thinking. Maybe you see where I'm going, and maybe you'll be able to expound upon that a little bit. I don't know, but that's kind of the line of thinking I hopped on this afternoon when I was doing some more prep for this podcast. And that's like, I'm probably going to cool on some of these guys a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair comparison, but like we've all been preaching, the tournament's a data point. You have to use it. It has to be part of your evaluation, but it's not everything. And I feel like a lot of us at No Ceilings understand that. And when you weigh the tournament compared to the rest of the season and conference play, you see a great defender. You see a guy who is capable of stepping out on the perimeter and holding his own against some of the bigger guys in the paint. You see a guy who rebounds well. You see a guy who can stretch the floor. We're talking about a guy who was almost at 40% three-point shooting on reliable volume, and a guy who that can move the ball and you trust to make a smart read. Again, he's not going to be one of these guys that breaks anyone down off the dribble. He's not the best, athlete on the floor, as you already spoke through, Nathan. But when I'm looking at a guy at the tail end of the second round, a guy who kind of fits the modern day mold of what I want in a four, a guy who spreads the floor, helps my big and my ball handler, whoever that is, whether it be a guard or a wing, whoever. If I have a guy that I know that I can rely on to space the floor, make a good read, and can hold his own defensively, that's what I feel like Fabian White Jr. brings to your team. And that's why, for a while, I was entertaining him in that second round range. Since then, he has fallen down a little bit, nothing significant, and he could climb his way back up there. But I don't know. He fits a role that I think a lot of NBA teams are looking for at that 4-man spot, and that's why I had him kind of at that tail end of the second round.
It's a good role, like we kind of agree upon, if he can shoot at least well enough from the corners and be able to space the floor at some level, right? But there's not really too many more words that we need to say on some of these guys. We can move on. Let's do the audience a favor. Let's go to one of the meat and potatoes games that we could get into, which would be Arkansas and Duke. We know all the guys, or we knew all the guys who were going to be in this game. Jaylen Williams on the Arkansas side. I guess before we get into all the more usual thoughts that we can have about the Duke prospects, we can start with Jaylen Williams, and you're the resident Arkansas guy here at No Ceiling, Stephen. I want your thoughts on not just Jaylen Williams in this game, but now that Arkansas is out of the tournament, you can kind of give your perspective on his tournament run and really the season as a whole. Because over the last 2 weeks, he was somebody who I didn't know if he was going to be likely to declare to go into the draft, right? I had brought him into like my top somewhere in between like the 40 to 50 range, because I figured I have to at least bring him into the conversation regardless of what he does, because his play has merited that. But now he's done so well in prime time tournament games to the point where his stock is likely as high as it's ever been, probably higher. He's gotten himself in front of mainstream evaluators, all these executives that you just pointed out. You just mentioned it a few minutes ago. The tournament is definitely a time where some people do get to really watch some of these prospects for the first time, especially NBA guys. And some people listening out there might think that's a little crazy, but like when you're a general manager and when you have a scouting staff and you even assign scouts to certain regions, like there's only so many games that you can actually get to and actually see. Right. To really get some fair evaluations. And depending on how some travel schedules work out, like you just might not have the chance to see a prospect like Jaylen Williams earlier in the year compared to in the tournament on national television on the brightest stage possible. This might have been like one of your anywhere between like your first to third time seeing Jaylen Williams. And when you see him do as well as he did against a Duke team that has a loaded front court, we're talking Mark Williams and Paulo. We'll get into thoughts on those guys in a second. But 19 points, 10 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, such an intelligent basketball player on both sides of the floor from start to finish. I'm probably going to have him in my early 30s when my next big board update comes out. And he might not be done climbing, because I think at this point, and I'll be curious to get your thoughts on this, I would be shocked if he did not only declare for the draft, but stay in the draft. I don't think he's at the point where he's going to test the waters anymore, Stephen. I think he's going to be in the draft, and I think NBA teams have to look at him very seriously with thinking about spending a late first round pick on him, or more.
Yeah,
who knows, or more.
That's totally fair. So what we saw in this game against Duke is a little bit of why I'm concerned about how he translates to the NBA year one. And I know that especially even Tyler Rucker, who couldn't be here tonight, a lot of people will say big men take time, and I subscribe to that logic as well. But here's the thing with Jaylen Williams is that if he's not drawing charges, which I think that we'll both agree that at the next level, players aren't just going to be running through him; they're going to be jumping.
He's not drawing a charge every other play down the floor at the next level. It's not going to happen.
Absolutely not. He's not getting those superstar calls at the next level, right? So if we're taking his best defensive ability out of the equation right now, he doesn't possess the verticality nor the second jump that is required to be a good to great NBA level big man. Now, is there a role that he can play? Sure, because I think that a lot of people would argue that Travion Williams is an NBA big man too and worthy of being drafted. So
I think Jaylen Williams is a rover. I think he's much more of like a 4-man who can kind of rove and play like safety a little bit in the defense because he is so intelligent, because he sees everything coming like a step or two ahead of everybody else. Maybe that doesn't lead to taking a charge, but maybe it leads to a timely double team or a really good rotation or making a play on the ball that somebody else isn't able to necessarily see a step or two ahead. Like I think you've said this multiple times, like if he's your primary rim protector, that's probably not the best course of action for your team. Like I don't think he's a 5-man in the NBA. Maybe he's in some small ball lineups, but I think more traditionally, he's probably a power forward, which if he's able to step out, shoot the ball, stretch the floor like we've seen him do in the tournament, and then defensively you give him that role where he can kind of just make plays around everything else that's going on, I actually think he could be a really good NBA player.
Well, and that's the thing with me, Nathan, is that if he's not going to be a 5, he's not necessarily the most fleet of foot. And I'm not saying that he has to, be, Aaron Gordon out there at the 4 or anything like that. But it's one thing to be able to see. It's another thing to be able to react. And that's what I'm concerned about with Jaylen Williams is I don't see the lateral movement with him right now. And we saw what he looked like against a big team. And we can argue that, yeah, Gonzaga's a big team too, but their bigs are more skilled than they are powerful. And then we saw what he looked like against a powerful front court with Duke. And it wasn't pretty. If he's going up against finesse and skill, he can kind of play that a little bit, but when we see power play with a guy like a Paulo Banchero and a Mark Williams, that's where he really struggled. And I think that he's going to see more of that at the NBA level than he is a Gonzaga type of front court. There might be certain teams and matchups where, yeah, you can use him and he can give you a little bit of an advantage, but I don't know if as a 4, how reliable he'll be playing against other 4s, because what we see in the NBA is there's not a lot of Jaylen Williamses at 4, right? There's a lot of guys who are wings and they're really fast and really strong. And I don't know if Jaylen Williams has a lateral foot movement to be able to keep up with that level of play. And if he's not protecting the rim and he's not blocking shots and he's not able to keep up on switches, is him just being a really good passer worth it? And that's what I think NBA front offices need to kind of ask themselves when they're looking to draft him this year.
But I agree with a lot of the points you just made. I come back to the fact of how he reads the game on defense. And even though he's not the most fleet of foot, we're seeing a guy like, and this obviously isn't a direct one-to-one comparison, but a lot of people said the same thing about Opera and Şengün. And he can get by at times defensively because of how he ultimately sees the game. I expect Jaylen Williams to fill out his body more. I think he's got a good frame to him. He's definitely going to get bigger and stronger. Is he the quickest guy on the floor to maybe you want to put him in all of these like on-ball defensive type of situations? No, but I think if he can, I don't know if hide-em's the right word, but generally when you're going up against another NBA team, it's not like all 5 players on the floor are generally like the most dynamic offensive players,
sure,
right? Like there's going to be some place on the floor where you can put him to the point where he can kind of like read and see everything going, and he'll be able to make a play on the ball or at least help contest or do something from a team defense perspective to where you can have him on the floor and you can take advantage of some of those strengths that he brings to the table on offense. Like I said, especially if the jump shot continues to round in the form. I think like Şengün, the biggest thing for Jaylen Williams is he's going to have to figure out how to not foul out of games. And I think that's going to be hard for him because if he is in this take the charge mentality, it's not even just that people are going to be able to finish over him. It's the fact that they will go through him and how the NBA calls fouls, continuation. Like he's going to pick up more blocking fouls than he did in college. Like what a blocking foul is in the NBA is a charge in college. And that's not going to be the same thing. So maybe that's the point to hit on that I believe would be more problematic for Williams than like the lack of foot speed stuff. Because we do see some NBA guys, if they read the game at a high enough level, they're able to make up for some of that.
Well, and what we see with Şengün is that those questions about the defense are more than fair because defensively he still has a long ways to go.
He fouls out all the time, or if he doesn't foul out, he's very close to.
But what we see with Şengün and why he won MVP in his league was that he's a good finisher around the basket and his touch traveled. I don't see the same level of touch with the Jaylen Williams, and I don't see him finishing around the basket as well as what we saw with an Alperen Şengün. And again, so if I got a guy who I can't trust as a 5 to protect the rim, he's not a good vertical athlete. he's going to give up second chance points because he doesn't have a good second bounce. He doesn't finish well around the rim, and he's a sub 30% 3-point shooter right now. Am I looking to draft him potentially in the first round because he's just a really cool passer like that? And I'm an Arkansas guy, right? And maybe I'm being
are you just dogging on him because you want him to stay another year, Steven?
No, I mean, look, this is a win-win for me because if he gets drafted, then I can say, hey, Arkansas is still pumping out NBA level talent, and I can beat my chest on that, right? And if he comes back, then we have a really good recruiting class, and we could be even more dangerous next season. I genuinely am concerned, though, about the level of praise that he's getting right now and what his role is going to be at the next level. And if he goes to a team, he needs to go to one that's going to bring him along slowly. Because I mean, even Alperen Şengün, as many concerns as we had, I still had him as like as a lottery level talent, kind of flirting with top 10 potential. He's got run immediately, and he still has a lot of concerns and a lot of issues, and he's playing for a team that's going to have potentially another top 3 pick. You know, it might be a little bit worse for Jaylen Williams, is all I'm saying.
So where would you take him if he comes in the draft and he stays? Where would you take him?
Well, if I'm a team that's got 3 first-round picks, I could understand flirting with a later one and saying, okay, maybe this is one of those guys that I'm going to draft and develop. But if I have 1 first-round pick and 1 second round, I'm definitely looking at other centers before I take him, if I take one at all. Right now on my board, I want to say I have him kind of middle of the second, and I know I'm going to be on the lower end, but I genuinely just have a whole lot of concerns on both sides of the ball. To me, the appeal with him is that he's a really cool passer. And I don't know if that's going to be something that I target in the first round.
We're still a few weeks out from me doing the deep dive of all deep dives on a lot of these guys. And Jaylen Williams is somebody I absolutely need to spend some more time with, but I'm starting to see the appeal. I'm starting to see the appeal when he's able to stretch the floor to some degree. He's able to bring the defense out to him. I think he's good enough with the ball in his hands to make something happen off the bounce. He has some spin stuff that he can go to. I agree with you. The finishing right at the basket, like 3 feet and in, is a little concerning, particularly against size. But I do like the little bit of the runner that he can go to off the move. I think he does have that in his bag, and I'd like to see that level of touch from him, especially if he's going to continue to expand on his outside game. I'm coming around to him more than I did previously. So like I said, I'm probably going to have him in like the early 30s at the next update of my board. Would not shock me depending on who's in and who's out of the draft if he climbs up a little bit higher. But I think at the end of the day, you and I have some of the same reservations. Let's move into some of the Duke guys. So I guess the biggest story of this entire tournament has been Paulo Banchero. And that's
Maybe.
Who's been the bigger story, Steven?
I mean, you can even make an argument that on his own team that Mark Williams has had a better tournament compared to expectations coming into the tournament. I mean, Paulo was a top 3 consensus guy all season long, and he played like it, right? Mark Williams is a guy that even myself, like I was like, do I take this guy in the first round? And I know that there are a bunch of guys on the ceilings that had him lottery level, even late first. But I think that Mark Williams has done the most for his draft stock on this team compared to Paulo, because Paulo's been like a top 3 guy for a lot of people all season long.
All right, so then we'll table Paulo for a second. Then, if you think Mark Williams is the bigger story, Steven, then what has he done in this tournament to really scream out to you and say, you better move me up your board?
I think going up against like a wider variety of big men, and still dominating and still showing that it doesn't matter who you line up across from me, I'm either going to go through, over, or around them. And he displayed a couple, right? Like it's not everything, but it's something. It's a data point. He did display a little bit more finesse than just being a dominant physical presence around the basket, and that's tantalizing. If a front office is going to see a guy like Mark Williams run the floor, which we all knew that he did extremely well, rebound and block shots, but display touch from, just outside of arm's reach from the basket, that's impressive. And then just being that consistent presence for Duke, because Paulo, for as great as he's doing, I'm not knocking him. He's actually gone up my board, not solely due to what he's doing in this tournament, but also the conference play the conference tournament as well. Mark is showing a lot, man. And I just think seeing it more consistently, seeing it against more than just, the Baycots of the world and centers like that, but showing it against
He's gonna
more
have to go up
finesse.
against Baycott again, though. That's
Yep.
gonna be another great test.
Yep, absolutely. So, but we're seeing it against a wider variety of front court. We see teams kind of planning to keep him away from the basket now, like he's becoming more of a focal point in scouting reports, and he's still being sought after from his teammates, and he's converting efficiently. And again, he's doing more outside of what we knew that he was going to do coming into the tournament. He's showing more flashes around that as well. So, or he's right there lottery level for me. He's taken the biggest jump between big board 4.0 to 5.0 so far. Well, not counting Dalen Terry, but yeah.
I mean, he's definitely been rising for me as well. I know you and I were going back and forth in the group chat last night about that. We had already started to move him up when we were thinking about our latest big board, or our next big board update, I should say, even before he had, some amazing moments in this latest round of the tournament in the second weekend here. With Mark Williams, I guess what I keep coming back to is I evaluate him so similarly, and I'm glad that Tyler Metcalf, by the way, in our group uses the words low maintenance with Mark Williams, because that's exactly what it is. Like, he only took in that Arkansas game, he only took 6 shots. He was 6 of 6 from the field, but he put in 12 points, 12 rebounds, 3 blocks. Very low maintenance. You don't have to feed him the ball. He's not somebody calling for it in the post. That's not his game. He's a roll man. He's operating out of the dunker spot. He's a transition guy. These rim running centers that we can talk about when we get to the NBA, if that's going to be your role and your calling card, that's fine. There's plenty of athletic big men that make that their calling card within the offense, and they play good, like great to really big minutes for a pretty good NBA team, right? The name I come back to is Robert Williams. And I know it's unfortunate timing to talk about Robert Williams, and not trying to rub it in Rutgers' face or anything like that, the resident Boston fan and no ceilings. But what's a big reason why Boston's done what they've done in the second half of the year? It's because really all year, he's just been a vicious shot blocker. He swats everything away around the basket. He's not the greatest center to play in the post one-on-one, right? Like, I wouldn't call him the best one-on-one post defender, but when you play on the right team and you have a bunch of guys who can play point of attack defense on the perimeter to limit penetration, or they're really smart, like even when somebody gets a step on Marcus Smart and guys like Brown and Tatum, they still know what angle to play their man at, even when they get beat on that initial step, to funnel them at the right spot towards the basket, to where somebody like Robert Williams has the chance to swat that shot away. And a lot of these Duke guys are really starting to figure out how to play a similar style. Paulo notwithstanding, I still have my concerns with him and my issues with him defensively, which we can get to. But a lot of these other guys, Wendell Moore, AJ Griffin, Jeremy Roach, Trevor Keels, they're starting to really figure out how to play with somebody like Mark Williams as we've gotten later in the year. And Williams has only continued to benefit from it, because even if he's not getting the block, he's contesting virtually everything that's around the basket. And you just factor in what that means defensively, along with the type of hyper efficient offense that he brings from a finishing standpoint. And that's when it gets easier to envision him as this like mid first round talent, even this lottery level talent, because Robert Williams, I know he didn't go here in the draft, but like at one point, Texas A&M big man was like a top 10 prospect in the country. And I think if you would ask people today doing a redraft, Mark Williams would probably be a top 10 guy at this point, because people had a lot of questions about his maturity and everything going on off the court. But now that he's grown up a little bit in the NBA, he's been in a really stable culture like the Boston Celtics. He's been a top 10 talent out of his draft class. And the best thing about Mark Williams is that we don't have any of those concerns about him coming in. We know that he's probably going to be a professional from day one when he sets foot in the NBA. We know he's going to work hard, and with his athletic talent, the fact that he's probably in like the top 3 to 4 percentiles of big men athletically in the NBA right when he sets foot from day one, that's a big deal. And I think when you factor in all of that, that's why I've been starting to come around on Mark Williams as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense too that we're seeing a jump in Paulo's production along with the jump in Mark Williams's production too, because one thing that Paulo has been getting praised for, and rightfully so, is his ability to make reads off the dribble
Oh, they're
and
so
deliver
great
good passes.
together.
Well,
Excellent.
and that's the thing, is that without Mark Williams, do we see this level of production from Paulo with this passing? I don't think so, because what's the one thing that Paulo does? He's going to get it on either the wing or the elbow. He's going to take a dribble and he's going to spin at the rim. And that's going to draw a lot of attention because Paulo has terrific touch. But what happens whenever too much pressure is given to Paulo is that Mark Williams is left wide open around the basket. And the one thing that people keep bringing up with Mark Williams is the load time that it takes for him to jump. I don't know what other centers in the NBA that players are, or that, evaluators are looking at when they look at Mark Williams and say his load time's too long. There's not a lot of just.
How many 7-footers are honestly 1 foot leapers in the NBA? Like
I don't know.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe Giannis. Maybe Giannis if you count him as a 5.
A lot of them are 2 foot leapers. Yeah, that doesn't knock me either. But
yeah, and I think that it's just something cool that we can bring up. And I'm not knocking other evaluators out there or anything like that, but sometimes I think that we get caught up in evaluating guys in a vacuum, or evaluating guys, chronologically or numerically on our boards, and just saying, okay, well, we know that Mark Williams doesn't jump as quick as like a Kennedy Chandler or whatever, right? But look at him relative to the position that he's going to play at the next level. He's fine. He's not going to be a guy that you're like, oh, he's going to take 5 seconds to, bring the ball up from his hip to the top of his head and elevate. He's a fine athlete and he runs the floor very well. He's a very fluid runner in the full court situations as well. So again, what we're seeing with Paulo, all rightfully earned and deserved. But the one thing that we can point to as his passing ability is that he has a reliable finisher around the basket, a guy who's finishing, like above 70% around the rim. And that makes your assist numbers, climb up.
Let's actually use that as a transition into Paulo, because you just mentioned the chemistry between him and Mark Williams. It's been spectacular, not just in the tournament, but going even back further than the ACC tournament, really the last month of the season. Those two have been excellent working together. But most recently, why is that? It's because, and I can't figure out how teams aren't getting better at defending this for the life of me, but I swear Duke runs that double drag screen every single time down the floor. And why is it working better now? Because Paulo is so much more confident shooting from the outside. He's making that defense sag out to him. And when defenders come to close out on his shot, he can get around him. Is he the quickest guy off that initial step? No. But at the same time, I think he's got enough counters off of that initial move. He has the footwork. He has the power to be able to get around guys or do 1 or 2 other steps and get to where he needs to go. And then because that defense is coming out to him, as you just said, it's leaving Mark Williams wide open as a beneficiary, and Paulo has the passing chops to be able to get him the ball on those lobs. And watching every single thing come together for him, the mid-range scoring, the 3-point scoring, the finishing around the basket, the passing, offensively, I'm being left with fewer questions than I had when we were coming into the tournament. Defensively, I still have all the questions. And I know your reaction, I think you still have all the questions as well. I think that I don't think it's about ability with him. I don't think it's anything related to his athleticism or that he's slow-footed. I don't think it's any of that. I just think he needs to be recoached and rewired in terms of how he approaches playing defense. And then I think he can be a better defender in the NBA, because we know he's got the body to be able to hold up against people in the league. Like if he's got to play somebody out of the post, if somebody's driving directly at him, I think with the right coaching and the right rewiring, he'll be able to play his angles much better and contain those drives more than just being obsessed, in my opinion, with wanting to make a play on the ball versus actually doing the right thing defensively. But that's potentially it's whole other podcast. But I mean, we want to talk about the exciting offensive development. So with that being said, Stephen, is he making his way back up the board for you as everything is played out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm almost like having to force myself not to put him number 1 solely due to what we're seeing in the tournament. He's climbed, roughly from 4 to 2 in a matter of weeks. And that's hard to do, Nathan, as you know, because once you get to that top portion of your board, it takes a lot to climb, and what we've seen happen at the same time as Paulo getting better and more efficient as an offensive player, we've seen other guys have struggles. We've seen Chet struggle with his fouls, and that's a whole nother podcast in itself. Like, people go to bat for Chet Holmgren more than anybody else I've ever seen, which
I
is
mean,
fair.
we can talk about some of the other top guys in relation to Powell if you want to bring them up. That's fair game.
I just think, look, Chet's great. He's phenomenal. He's a top 3 talent. And I think that people understand that. But the one thing that I wish that we saw more of was just more unbiased takes on evaluating his game, because what we see it a lot with mainstream guys, right? They'll say, yeah, he had a bad game, but look at the numbers. And yeah, he had a bad game, but it's because of X, Y, and Z. Like, it's hardly ever like a fair assessment of Chet messed up. Like, Chet did something wrong. Like, he did not adjust his game. Like, he didn't adjust his style of play. And that's all I want to say. So, when we look at Paolo in relation to Chet, he struggled in the tournament at various times outside of that opening game. And then we saw Jaden Ivey, he struggled too. And we're more quickly to say, yeah, okay, like, these were the concerns that we had with Ivey. And then Jabari Smith against Miami was a terrible game for him offensively as a shooter, right? He did other things well, but we knocked
He did
him
virtually
down.
everything else better on the court, which I don't know if we gave him enough credit for when we talked about him last week, but it was really only the shooting that he didn't do well.
And again, when we hear, criticisms about Chet Holmgren, we say, oh, we had 11 and 14, and that's a quote unquote bad game. Well, you could make the exact same argument for Jabari Smith. He put up a double-double. He had like 10 and 14. Oh, and by the way, he improved his playmaking as well, right? So it's just like, I feel like draft Twitter as a whole, and even some mainstream, agencies out there, we're so quick to protect Chet Holmgren. And again, I love Chet. He's a top 3 talent, like, hands down. But I don't think that he fairly gets assessed. And meanwhile, we have a guy like Paulo Banchero, who we said at the beginning of the season could be a number 1 guy. And then he comes into the season, we're like, well, you need to improve your playmaking. He's done that. And then we said, all right, well, your defense is trash. You need to improve it. He's done that. He still has a lot of things to improve on, but we've seen him, and what you just spoke on, Nathan, was that the give a crap factor. When he's engaged, he's a pretty good defender. He's not like a Chet Holmgren or a Mark Williams level defender, but when he's engaged, he can do a little bit of damage. And one thing I think that he kind of falls in love with is that he has his safety blanket. Like, as a kid, he's got his favorite blanket in Mark Williams, and he knows that I can gamble a little bit. Like, I can reach on this drive and try to poke out a steal, or I can try to get a block from behind, because I know that Mark Williams is going to be right there behind me to clean it up. Maybe that's what he needs ultimately at the next level, show that he is a capable defender. These are questions that I had about a guy named Anthony Edwards coming into the NBA, was the give a crap factor. And we saw that when in his lone season in SEC play, he gets to the NBA and he cares a little bit more because he's in a system and he's got better talent around him. Paulo doesn't have the talent question, but having an elite collegiate rim protector, I think that he just falls in love with that and gets a little bit lazy because of what we've seen with him when he is engaged. He can defend, but I don't know, man. Like, he's climbed up all the way to 2 for me, and I wouldn't rule out the possibility of number 1, but I feel myself having to talk it down more than talking it up, if that makes sense.
It's amazing what happens when he transforms his offensive game from wanting to settle for all of these crazy, ridiculous contested jumpers to limiting himself, like in the Arkansas game, for example, just 2 3-point attempts, right? Just 2 to keep the defense honest, to work himself inside the arc, get to the line where he went 7 for 8. He didn't shoot the ball efficiently from the field overall, but it's the types of shots that he's been taking and mixing in playmaking responsibilities, being able to set other guys up, take that pressure away from Wendell Moore having to handle every single responsibility within the offense, letting Jeremy Roach focus more on scoring from the point guard possession versus, having to set everybody else up. It's really helped this team out a lot to bring balance to every lineup that they're trotting out on the floor, any rotation you want to talk about. And yeah, I've been really, really pleased with Paulo. Am I going to have him 1? No. That spot is reserved for Chet. It will remain reserved for Chet, in my opinion. I tweeted out the other day, and it actually got quite the traction on social media about how I think Chet's been underutilized in the half court for Gonzaga on the offensive end all
Sure.
year. And you saw another example of it the other night, where when he actually did catch the ball in areas where Jabari Smith and Paolo Banchero have gotten to work out of all year, I like his jump shot the best in that elbow mid-range area out of the other two guys, even Jabari Smith Jr. I think Jabari Smith is the better three-point shooter. I think he's always going to be the better three-point shooter. I think that's going to be his NBA calling card. I think Chet's going to be maybe not excellent from three-point range, but I think great in a lot of areas. And I think he's got a mid-range game that can be untapped in the NBA because of the amount of spacing that he's going to have to work with. We know that he can finish easy plays around the basket. We know how well he shoots around the rim. We can talk about some of the defensive warts as you highlighted, but I think offensively, an NBA team is going to figure out how to use him a lot better. Maybe not in like this incredibly high usage role, but just get him more shots in different areas of the floor other than just go clean up this mess, right? Or finish this play running at the basket in transition. I think an NBA team is going to be able to utilize him in the half court. And when he continues to develop, get a little more comfortable off the dribble, I think he could be a pretty scary offensive player, more than I think a lot of people would care to admit. But in terms of that number 2 spot, when we really talk about Paulo versus Jabari, I've tried to argue all year for Jabari as being just this elite spot up shooter at this point, to where I don't need him to put the ball on the deck all the time when he can just shoot over anybody he wants. But then you look at Paulo, who can put the ball on the deck every single possession and make something happen with it, to the point where this is such an offensive driven game, to where if you at least have the size to be an average NBA defender and you can bring potentially exponential offensive value at a prized position, you really have to consider that package. And to your point, Stephen, I'm glad that you said that, the give a crap factor. Like, there is no reason why Paulo shouldn't at least be an average defender in the NBA. Yeah. Like, in my opinion, I really don't see many excuses for that.
It's got to be the give a crap factor. And again, I liken the concerns that I have with Paulo on the defensive end. I had a lot with Anthony Edwards in 2 different roles in the NBA defensively. Unless you're, a Marcus Smart of the world or a Patrick Beverly, guards aren't necessarily going to be asked to be locked down defenders, right? And Anthony Edwards, I feel like relative to his peers at his position, he's definitely serviceable because of his athleticism and his strength. I think Paulo, the emphasis on him being a better defender is going to be a little bit more prevalent. But again, 6'10", 250, moves like a cat. I mean, this guy can do so much. And I think that depending on the team that he goes to, he's going to get maybe just as good a coaching as he's getting right now, possibly a little bit better. Who knows? But again, learning how to defend at the NBA level. And we're talking about a guy earlier like a Jaylen Williams kind of being a rover defender. I mean, Paolo Banchero in that role could be scary as well because of his physical traits and, his athleticism. So he might not be one of these guys that we're looking at like a Jaylen Williams and saying, can he be a primary rim protector? How is he on the weak side? Paulo, I think, profiles a heck of a lot better on that side of, or that role defensively than I think a lot of people might otherwise think.
So let's move into the second last game that we'll really talk about tonight. We'll close out with the game that I saw in person, St. Peter's against North Carolina, and then we can give some fun Final Four predictions, things that we might be looking for there. But Miami and Kansas, this was a battle in the first half, a battle that Miami actually got the best of Kansas. And then Kansas decided to actually come out and play like the number 1 seed that they are and blow the doors off of Miami. And it's a very similar result to what we saw St. Peter's against North Carolina, where North Carolina just completely overwhelmed St. Peter's. The Cinderella story was over. Similar thing happened with Miami. Although Miami is an ACC team, they have 2 bona fide stud scorers, at least at the college level, in Isaiah Wong and Cameron McGusty. I'll be curious to hear if you think either one of those guys should really have NBA scouts drooling a little bit, the potential they might be able to bring them in some capacity, even if they don't draft them. But obviously the story's about Kansas. And I want your take, Steven. Anybody in this game, you can go any direction you want. Who impressed you the most?
Man, I'll kind of round robin this because I think that you can answer it differently depending on what you're looking for. Remy Martin has had himself a heck of a tournament resurgence. I mean, coming off the bench, playing clutch minutes, playing big time moments. Remy Martin has been all over the place. I don't know if he's a guy that could be sneaking. I mean, we know that there's only going to be 58 players drafted, but when we talk about summer league invites, we talk about, two-way contracts, undrafted free agents. Like Remy Martin is undersized, but he's a microwave scorer and he's showing it in Kansas right now. And then Lightfoot kind of low key had a big impact on this game. McCormick, you could say the same thing, although that he was hurt. He gave, concentrated doses of just badassdom on this team. He was just amazing when he was on the floor.
I think he's going to be good to go for the Final Four, right? I believe so. McCormick. I think so.
We'll see. I'm curious to see what Kansas does with him for practices and training and things like that, because he was only able to give them a couple minutes at a time. But, McCormick was good. I think that Jaylen Wilson, his points weren't there, but his defensive impact and his ball movement were felt. And then we're left with the top two guys, right? Christian Braun and Oshai Baji. I think that Braun throughout the tournament has been the more consistent presence. He's been the more steady hand. He had a nasty dunk in transition, which was amazing to watch in this game. But I feel like this was the game that Oshai, you could argue that he got, garbage time points or what have you, but we saw a bit of a resurgence in him. And I tweeted out before the game that I hated that this was going to be some people's first impression of Oshai Baji was watching him in the tournament, and they're going to go without seeing the tremendous season that we saw from him. But, hitting threes, he's been a great defender, like all tournament long too, by the way, but the offensive output hadn't really been there. He finished, I want to say, with 18 points, close to it. He had a good game. He hit for multiple levels. That one area,
four steals on the defensive end too.
4 steals, and the one area that you point out in his game, Nathan, he did hit a pump fake from the 3-point line to take a dribble and hit a pull up midi. So he's showing a little bit more versatility, as the tournament goes on. And it was good to see him kind of find his footing against Miami. But I think the role players, a combination of McCormick, Lightfoot, and of course Remy Martin were the guys that really kind of impressed me more so than anybody else due to the level of expectation that I have for some of these other guys.
Before I answer the question that will obviously be geared more towards Kansas, is you fallen in love with Isaiah Wong a little bit? And he's a guy who I think people had him on their radars before they came into the year. He's had one hell of a tournament run. Very not a shooter, but a smooth scorer off the bounce, can get to the basket, can pass a little bit, and then on the defensive end, he can make some plays on the ball. Any buzz there for you about Isaiah Wong?
I get the appeal, but I think that there's a lot of guys at his position and similar build that do a lot of the same thing, but at a more consistent basis, and even probably give you a little bit more on the defensive side and the playmaking side. But I would be lying if I didn't say that I wasn't impressed with the level of output that we've seen from Isaiah Wong, both in the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament as well. He's picked up that efficiency and that consistency a lot more as of late. But I don't think that he's kind of climbing up the board as much as some of these other players that have had, similar, if not greater, tournament runs. But not to knock him, he's had great stretches, but I wouldn't put him within my top 58 right now. But when I get to that top 80 to 100 range, I'm starting to entertain him a lot more seriously than I was prior to this tournament.
I agree. I think certainly within the top 100, I think he has to be there, especially with what he's done. He was a guy I went back and forth with Mavs Draft about before the season started. And now that I've been able to get some more eyeballs on him in the tournament, I will be honest, I did not watch much Miami basketball during the regular season, but now that I'm able to get some eyes on him, and I will be doing a little bit more of a deep dive on him as we close out some of the weeks here leading up to the draft. I think top 100, absolutely. I think you could probably start talking me in the top 80 as well. I think he's got to be on some sort of a longer form board. So my answer to the question, I told you I was coming in with something not creative.
Here it is. I can't
spicy.
wait to hear this.
Listen, man. I've watched Christian Braun for 2 years now.
I had a feeling.
I know that everybody's had the Oshai Baji train rolling, no ceilings included. We're mocking him like top 10 now, and I'm like, I want to fall out of my chair. I'm like, are we really going to mock Oshai Baji like with a top 10 pick? Christian Braun will not be ranked higher on my board than Oshai Baji. That's probably not going to happen. However, I really would not be shocked at this point if Brown's the player who has the better career. And I really would not be shocked. I think for some people at this point, that's probably spicy. Although a lot more mainstream evaluators are starting to come around on Christian Braun. Like ESPN was having him pop into his boards. Like Sam Vecini was saying some nice things about him on their most recent episode. We know Jonathan Wasserman's been a fan of Christian Braun, pegging him as like a potential top 20 guy. It's not going to shock me, Steven, if he has the better career. I look at what Christian Braun's doing, what he's been doing for Kansas all year, particularly in this tournament. Now that they're putting the ball in his hands, they're trusting him to make decisions in the half court as well as in transition. He's been a transition player over these past 2 years, but now that he's really starting to make things happen from a playmaking perspective in the half court. He's been able to do some things from a shot making perspective off the bounce inside the arc, has a nice runner he can go to. He can finish around the basket. All of the shooting splits check out. His synergy percentiles are terrific. The fact that he can make decisions off of a live dribble and not just be a player who solely comes off of a handoff or off a screen to do one thing, right? And not that Oshai Baji isn't excellent doing some of those one decision plays, whether it's quick stop and pop, whether it's come off the screen, get himself into an open spot up three, knock it down, get all the way to the basket off of that drive. He has an open lane off of a handoff to get all the way to the basket, finish. He can do that. He can cut to the basket, finish off that vertical lob along the baseline. He can do these things, but he's a one action, one read type of player, in my opinion. And I see Christian Braun as being a multiple action, multiple read type of player. And I also think he's the better defender of the two. So I'm not going to rank him higher, but
it sounds like you have no reason to not rank him higher, Nathan.
I think what Oshai does at an excellent level, there's still a good to great chance that beats what Christian Braun can do in terms of being more versatile, but maybe not being able to do anything at a great to excellent level. Like the fact that Oshai Baji can be a flamethrower from 3-point range, I think that gives people enough of an argument to rank him in the mid first round. If you want to have him late lottery, fine, go for it. Like that gives you enough of an argument. The fact that he is that elite of a spot up shooter at this level. But I like versatile guys. I like guys who can dribble, pass, and shoot. And if you're buying into the jump shot for Christian Braun, especially, that's where the argument comes into place, man. Listen, if we're coming back to this conversation 5-7 years down the road, and Christian Braun earned a really nice second contract with the team who drafted him, and Oshai Baji's moving on to another team, I'm just saying it wouldn't shock me.
I think that there's a lot of logic to what you're saying, Nathan, because although I would disagree with you on some aspects in your comparison or who you like better at, different parts of their game, I do see your point that Christian Braun is probably going to be the most consistent. Like whatever he is, his first, 2-3 seasons, I don't necessarily seeing it improving a whole heck of a lot. Like he's going to be one of these like well-rounded guys that gives you a little bit of everything at a good, consistent level. Whereas Oshai has that potential to be, a higher tier player, right? Like he can be a more dynamic or explosive scorer, but probably has a little bit more weaknesses in his overall game compared to.
I don't know if he's more not that Christian Braun is like really dynamic on offensive player, but in terms of like if we would use the word dynamic with Oshai, I'm not sure dynamic is the correct word. I think if we're gonna like peg his scoring up a few notches, he could be like that ultimate heat check type of guy to where he just gets rolling, he gets hot, and he's making like he did in this game. He gets hot in the second half, he ends up finishing 8 of 12 from the field. Like that's the type of player he could still be at the next level. And I would agree with you. If that's where we're going to compare the two as like offensive talents, yeah, I don't think Christian Brown is really like that much of a heat check guy. Although we've seen those games from him this year, like St. John's, the game that I still, smack myself in the head over because I couldn't get there in person to see it. Had the
Yep.
tickets, but I couldn't get there. But we've seen that. But yeah, if we're talking like game on a game to game basis, who's the most likely to chip in 18 to 20 points if it's going to happen, I would agree with you. It's a Baji.
Yeah, and again, there's certain aspects of Ochai's game that I'm buying a little bit more higher than what you are, right? And not to downplay Christian Brown, I have him, kind of flirting with late first round considerations. I still haven't got him into my first round yet.
You got to get him there. Get him there, Stephen. I'm going to rub off on you enough. And by the time we're at the draft, I think I will have rubbed off enough on you to where we have him there.
Well, and I think that both you and Rucker have, right? Like I have listened more to Christian Brown, potential and promise with you guys more than there's really no one else outside of No Ceilings that I'm really hearing a lot of Christian Brown buzz about. Like there's like, oh, okay, he's had a nice game, but there's not that consistent level of you guys got to buy in on Christian Brown. You guys have to listen to us when we tell you that Christian Brown is going to be a good NBA player. Like it's not really buzzing around as much outside of No Ceilings.
I think Chuck might have a few words to say about that. I specifically remember Chuck asking a question about him for Sam and Penny, where he said that Christian Brown could potentially have a sneaky lotto case. Now, okay, I didn't go that far. I did not go that far. That's, Chuck says a lot of smart things. He also goes out on a lot of limbs. I did not go out on that limb, but I wouldn't. Not the only one.
I couldn't tell you who I think Chuck likes more between like a Christian Brown, a Jake LaRavia, or a Vince Williams Jr., and that's where I kind of stand on that. But again,
we love Chuck. We love Chuck.
Oh, dude, Chuck is the absolute best. We both had him on, when you were doing the solo, when I had my own show solo, we both had him on. He gives a lot of great insight. But again, that consistent, like every couple episodes, Christian Brown.
No, nobody's doing it. I agree.
No one's doing it like we are, man.
So let's get into this last game. In-person thoughts. St. Peter's against North Carolina. Stephen, I don't have many because it just wasn't that type of game to where I'm sitting here and like I'm writing a bunch of things down on my phone that I can just I'm gonna blow your mind on a podcast. It wasn't that kind of game.
North Carolina was pretty good, weren't they?
It was physical dominance from start to finish. Armando Bacot finished with 22 rebounds. I looked up, it was like not even that deep into the second half. It was like near the beginning of the second half. He already had like 16, 17 rebounds. I'm like, good God. Like St. Peter's had nobody who could match up with his size. And I guess it's technically a fair question to ask if Bacot's like an NBA center. I don't think that he is, but can you completely rule it out? Kind of like Matt Penny said on him and Sam's latest podcast. Can you rule it out for somebody who produces at the college level like he can? Like you can't rule it out. I would agree with Matt. I don't know how much of it's going to translate for him either, but he was a big reason why they were dominant in this game. Yep. Both Caleb Love and RJ Davis did not have their best shooting performances, although Caleb Love, some of the dagger shots that he was able to hit, including that one where he kind of hit the defense with that Euro step off the bounce and finish around the basket. That was something that doesn't always whip out every game. Brady Manick was probably the ultimate equalizer in this.
We got to talk about him for a hot minute, man. I got questions about Brady Manick.
Are you about to say that like he's jumping up your board or like what's going on?
I'll put it to you like this. Our mutual friend of ours, Lee Branscombe, who, had the Which Carolina podcast, and he's doing, the Charlotte Hornets, the Buzzbeat podcast. He put out like, I want to say like mid to late January. He said, is Brady Manick a second round pick? And I was just kind of like, hey man, I love you, buddy. Like, keep doing what you're doing. And I wasn't really giving it much of any thought. And I don't think a lot of people around that time of year were giving North Carolina thought other than, maybe Coach Spence, keep pushing that Caleb Love out there. But Brady Manick was just a guy that was like, okay, like he's just a good 3-point shooter. And then we get to the conference tournament and he's putting up these games. And then we get to the NCAA tournament and he's putting up like 28 and 25 and, almost 20 points in this game. And I'm just asking myself, Nathan, like, he's got size. He can give you minutes at the 3 and the 4. We know that he can shoot. He showed that he can finish around the basket against a really good rim protector in Ndefo. I don't know, man. Like, does he not scream Spurs 15th man to you? Like, he could be on an NBA roster and give you kind of like that Steve Novak, Matt Bonner. Yes, I know I'm putting out, standstill white guys as comparison. That's okay. But I think I think that Manic could give you minutes in the NBA as a flamethrower, like just standstill 3-point shooter.
So the thing that I can admit about Manic is if there are guys like Garrison Matthews who can earn NBA contracts, why can't Brady Manic earn an NBA contract? Is he going to be drafted? No. I could not see an NBA team spending a draft pick on him. But if we're talking about guys who may not even be ranked in my top 80 or top, I guess he'll probably be in my top 100. It'd be bad to say he wouldn't be there like at this point, but
he's not right now. But I'm having a hard time being like, okay, like when I'm getting to like Baylor Shireman, like who would I rather have on an NBA team?
We're going to filter out like 15 to 20 guys probably. So I think at some point I'd be pretty hard pressed to admit that he wouldn't be there. But if we're talking about guys who might not be initially ranked on our boards and we're working for an NBA team and we're looking at all these guys who we could potentially tell somebody to give them a call, see if we can work something out with them. Let's see if we can bring him in. Like he has to be near the top of that list at this point. He has to be. Like he's a guy you have to at least see if it can work in the NBA, because if it can, we're talking about a guy who scored, you ready for this? He scored in double figures in 16 straight games, including the ACC tournament and now the NCAA tournaments where they're going to the Final Four. 16
as like a fourth option.
Exactly. He's not really one of their go-to guys, although he actually was against St. Peter's. That was more of a size thing. Like him being able to take advantage at that 4 spot when St. Peter's, like a lot of their 4 men are probably more like the equivalent of 3s, even though they're not like athletically quick enough to play the 3 on a higher level court. But, and then when you factor in the shooting touch, like he went 4 of 6 from 3 in the game. Steven, I can't figure out for the life of me why people are leaving this guy open. Why the hell are you helping off of Brady Manic? Like, it seems like every time these guys do that, like he's knocking it down.
Like he's getting less coverage than Leaky Black. And like, what's up with that? You know what I mean? Like Leaky's a fine player, but Brady Manic has just been on an absolute tear lately. And I don't know, man, like I'm having a lot of hard feelings, like even potentially keeping him out of my second round. Like the more I go and look at the tail end of my mock in my top, 80 that I'm putting out right now, there's got to be a team out there that looks at Brady Manic and is just like, pick him up. Like, let's just see what the guy's got. He's hitting consistently. Like if Davis Bertans can command, $100 million in free agency, then I don't understand why it's out of the realm of possibility for Brady Manic to be a second round draft pick.
I mean, if he's on a team with at least 2, where he's in a lineup with at least 2 guys who, command as much gravity on offense, and he's like the 4th or 5th option within that lineup on the night, probably the 5th option. But if he's alone spotting up in the corner, like you tell me you wouldn't want him for a few minutes a night. Like we're not talking about somebody who's going to be like an 8th man for a team. Like he's probably in like the 10th to 12th man role if we're being nice. But those guys are also valuable in the regular season for an NBA team. And if he can share the court with 1 or 2 starters who can put the ball in the basket and demand that much attention on the offensive end, like tell me Brady Manic can't step in and hit a few threes or attack a closeout on rare occasion and knock down something around the basket. Like
he's got a little touch around the rim too. Like we saw that again against, Ndefo, who's no slouch of a defender. So I don't know. It's just something I felt like we, would be prudent to bring up, but I don't know. Brady Manic is a guy that I can't get out of my head right now.
I mean, he's probably not the guy who you want on the defensive end.
No, probably not.
Team. No, but like 8 minutes a night, ask him to take like 3-4 shots. And if he can knock down 2 or 3 of them, that's pretty darn good. So yeah, I agree with you. Flying very under the radar for a good reason. But at the same time, yeah, I think he's a pro. And if he's not a pro in the NBA, I bet you some team overseas is going to pick him up. Like
Absolutely.
I would be shocked if he's not playing professional basketball at least somewhere for the next like 4 to 6 years.
Which is still really hard to do. It's still really hard to be a good European. Yeah.
It is. Like he's on the older side. I think is he going to be 24? I think he's going to be.
Yeah, he's a graduate. I know that. So he's already done with school. He's literally a grown man out there playing, and maybe that has a little bit to do with his production. I don't know, but he's a post grad player. So we know that he's up there.
He's 23, so by the time he would start his NBA season, he would be 24. So
I think is actually pretty young as far as post grads go. Like, not to get like too nichey here, but like as far as post grads go, I feel
the fact that he wouldn't be 24 before the draft, he technically has like a year in his favor, which is fine. It's still not sexy for NBA teams, but like, yeah, like even if it's not in the NBA, playing pro ball somewhere else, getting buckets in the G League. Like I think he has some level of life after college basketball to him. And I think going to North Carolina was definitely a big boon for him to be able to have that, especially now that they're on a Final Four run.
And he can still put up big, like North Carolina's still in the fight. This is probably not going to be the last game that we see Brady Manek have a good outing.
Probably not. And it's a little crazy. I think we've had the most glowing words about Brady Manek, and it wasn't about any of the other guys on North Carolina. I'm still not that big of a Caleb Love guy, man. I want to buy in. Coach Spins did an excellent job at breaking down why he could have a role in the NBA. We talk about these heat check type of shooters who can change a game. If he is doing some of the stuff that he did off the bounce in that game, along with some of the other moments that he's had in the tournament, if he's able to do those things, but just in terms of like, I don't know. I just feel like I can recuperate more value on that pick from what I'm probably going to be looking for Caleb Love to provide than what I'm getting with that pick. I don't know.
Do you like him or Isaiah Wong better?
Because I think that's tough. That is tough.
I think that's where, when you're asking me about Isaiah Wong's draft stock, I don't know if like when I get to the Caleb Love level of the draft, that if I'm just like, okay, like Isaiah Wong, he's probably not going to get to the basket as much at the next level. But we know that Caleb Love can shoot a little bit better, and he's probably a little bit better of a passer. I might take Caleb Love still.
I think I would take Caleb Love as well, but that's more of a toss-up than I think people would care to admit. I would actually, if Coach is listening to this podcast, I would love for him to like comment when we share it or something. Like
bring him and Richard on the show, and they can have it out between which one do we take. That
would be a battle. Now, if either of you guys are listening, please somebody go do that podcast. Let's wrap it up here. So let's go. Very quick Final Four thoughts. We get Duke, North Carolina for a Final Four. Thank God we get that game. That is the best thing that we could possibly have for the end of Coach K's career. And then we get Kansas, Villanova on the other side. So we get 2 games chock full of blue bloods, and then we'll have a blue blood championship as well. So even though we didn't get all the number 1 seeds, we didn't get Baylor and Arizona and Gonzaga, I think we have one hell of a Final Four right here. Like, I'm not going to complain about this. Anything in particular, Stephen, that you're looking for in the Final Four?
Well, so for this Final Forecast, and I just wanted to say it again because I just love the play on words that I use there. Look, we know that this is Coach K's last season, and they were already supposed to have their last match again, in the conference play, but we're seeing it again here. I think that Duke they're just too big. Like Baycott, I don't know how he's not going to have a 2020 game again. I can almost guarantee that with the rebounding and the scoring and the defense that Duke's front court has. And so if we're ruling out Baycott putting up a 2020 performance, Brady Manek is probably going to be their leading scorer. If I've had to venture to guess, RJ Davis hasn't really had the best tournament. Neither is Caleb Love. Both of them, I believe, have had only, quote unquote, only 120-point performance. And with Duke, they're playing their best basketball of the year, and they're just rolling. Yeah. So I would just think that Duke has that game. And then Villanova, Kansas is pretty interesting because I think if you're looking at just like depth and and top end talent, you have to go Kansas. But the way that Coach Wright is coaching right now, the way that defense is playing, like it's going to
be a rock fight.
It's
really
going to be
a rock fight.
It's going to be ugly. I would probably still lean Kansas just because I think that they can hit you with a bunch of different looks, especially if McCormick is going to play at a decent level. We saw Lightfoot have a good game. Jalen Wilson can kind of cancel out some of those shifty forwards, I think, for Villanova. And then we're going to see it. How many times do you think we're going to see Colin Gillespie post up Remy Martin? Like, that's what I think it's going to come down to in their matchup.
So I think I'm going to pick the same two teams. I'm going to pick Duke and Kansas. I think as far as the national championship would be concerned, even over the course of the UNC game, it's going to come down to your boy, Wendell Moore, as well as Jeremy Roach, continuing to hit those mid-range jump shots / runners that they've been hitting over the course of the tournament. If they keep knocking down those shots, along with everything else you're going to get from Paulo Banchero that we talked about, Mark Williams, we didn't even talk about AJ Griffin. Holy cow, he's been phenomenal. Like I think he's going to end up top 5 on my board. I really do. I don't feel.
I have some defensive concerns. I have some defensive concerns with him because he's kind of fallen off a cliff defensively lately.
Yeah, I think more of that's understanding versus actual talent and ability. Like physically, he can match up with any of the wings that you would want him to. In the NBA, he's only going to continue to get even stronger, which is crazy to say. He's already like 6'6", 225 pounds. I think it is more of like an understanding type of thing. And it's those same processing concerns that you see even on the offensive floor side of the ball as well. I mean, he's similar to what I've talked about with Oshai Baji. Oshai Baji has gotten better at being a multi-decision guy if he has to off of that initial action. AJ Griffin is not that multi-decision guy. He is one-track mind. If I'm coming off the handoff, I'm going to get downhill. I'm going to try to score at the basket. If I have to stop and pop and create something in like that 10, 12-foot area, I can do that. But he's not looking to pass the ball. He's not looking to change course or change direction. Like he is that type of offensive player. And I think I would imagine over the course of his NBA career, he's going to be able to make multiple reads off of those progressions. He's probably going to get better as a pick and roll player. I think he's going to figure some of that stuff out. And then on the defensive end, I think he's got a lot to work on as far as playing off-ball defense, communicating with his teammates, playing the right angles versus similar to Paulo, kind of being a little careless in terms of, I think I can still make the play on the ball from here. He's got some things he has to clean up, but what you can't teach Steven is when he does stop and pop for that jumper and he rises up over everyone, the hang time on his jumper is ridiculous. I still think he's coming back a little bit athletically, and he's hopefully going to get more of that pop back as well, especially once he gets into his rookie year in the NBA. He's had one of the best freshman prospect shooting seasons that we could probably point to. And yeah, there are plenty of weaknesses we can talk about, man, but his strengths, what his strengths are about as important to the NBA game as we can point to right now. And that's why I'm getting less and less concerned about him by the day.
And that's fair. And one thing that I will point to at that Arkansas game in particular is that his operation in the mid-range was something that he hadn't really shown a lot due to the construction and the schematics of that Duke team. But we saw him kind of drive to the basket and hit a couple of, operating on that pivot foot, fall away jumpers, or even kind of up and unders a little bit. The fact that he's not just a standstill 3-point shooter and profiles to be able to get to the basket a little bit better, that weighs in his favor too. But again, I have to go back and look at that defense before I start cementing where I think that he'll go on my big board, but definitely a top 7 level talent. There might be a couple of prospects that I prefer at 5, but I also would not be like vehemently opposed to anybody having him at 5 either.
So Duke, Kansas, who you got?
I got to go Duke, man. I think that Duke is just too strong, and it's like Kansas is limping its way this far and getting by on depth in their coaching. And I think that Oshai has got to show up for them to stand a chance. As good as Brown has been, as good as Wilson's been, as good as Martin's been, they really need Oshai, their best player that we've seen all year long, to step up. But I think that Duke they're too big, they're too strong, they're too fast, and it's just like they're a team of destiny this season. I hate to be super cheesy like that because I'm typically not, but it's just like everything is going right for them this late in the year.
I'm also going to take Duke, which means that we're going to get a UNC Villanova rematch in the championship, and it's going to be one of those two teams that wins.
And North Carolina wins the title as what? Where are they? The fifth seed this year?
Eighth
seed. That's right.
So that's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. We thank everybody out there for continuing to listen to Draft Deeper. We've been doing an incredible job from a performance perspective, and that's not possible without every single one of you listening out there. So I can't thank you all enough for the support. Steven, go ahead, plug yourself, plug what you're doing.
Yeah, well, again, I just want to kind of piggyback off of what you just said and echo that appreciation. The fact that I've only been on Draft Deeper for a little over a week now, the amount of love and response, getting emails and DMs and things like that, it's been a lot to me. So the Draft Deeper audience is top notch. They're top shelf. No one beats them. But if you want to continue to follow me, you can do so on Twitter. It's where I'm most active at Stephen G Hoops. That's Stephen with the PHG, then Hoops. Written work's going to be coming up this upcoming Sunday. I have a piece about Wendell Moore Jr. and it's going to be a fun article. So stay tuned.
I hope he doesn't disappoint you on Saturday.
Well, if he does, he's done so much throughout the year that I think that he should be considered as a first round talent. And there's going to be more on that in written form Sunday at noceilingsnba.com. Yeah, and we got a great show lined up later on in this week, Nathan, that I'm sure that you're going to plug away. But yeah, just keep following No Ceilings NBA. You can follow that on Twitter too, No Ceilings NBA on Twitter. And
you can follow me on Twitter at Draft Deeper. Make sure you are subscribed to this podcast wherever you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. As Steven said, make sure you are subscribed to the Substack, noceilingsnba.com, pumping out written content every day, Monday through Friday during the work week. We got Steven pumping out content on Sundays now. We're up to 6 days a week. Holy cow. We're gonna start stacking up the content, my friend.
Can't beat it anywhere else.
Cannot beat it. Nobody's doing what we're doing. So definitely make sure you're tuned into all those channels. As you said, Twitter at No Ceilings NBA. Make sure you're following us there. Later this week coming up, we got Rashad Phillips, the legend, slept on. So we're going to talk about quote unquote his guys on that episode of the podcast. And then we're going to keep the guests rolling. Gonna throw you a little bit of a curveball next week. I think Steven's going to be hosting a show coming up here soon. It's going to be an exciting moment for him. And then we got a mock draft coming in the works as well. Come on, you got to do a post-tournament mock draft. I mean, who doesn't want to do that, right?
You're breaking rules. I think you're contractually obligated if you do any sort of NBA draft content and you don't do a mock draft out after the tournament. You're breaking all the rules.
And then hopefully not too long after that, we will start doing our big board comparison series, peeling the onion layer by layer. That's going to be really exciting to do that kind of a peek in every single week. I think it's going to be fantastic content for the audience. So once again, thank you all so much for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.